Hey all, here OS Reviews. In this video, we're taking a closer look at the Miyoo Mini Plus. This is not to be confused with the Miyoo Mini V4 that we reviewed a couple of months back, which is even more petite. As the name kind of implies, the Plus version has a larger 3.5-inch display compared to the 2.8-inch panel found on the regular Mini. However, the majority of components inside, including the processor as well as the Linux operating system that it runs on, are pretty much identical, so it just comes down to preferences from an ergonomic point of view. Do you want something that's even smaller, truly pocket-sized for on-the-go gameplay, or something which is a little bit larger but perhaps a bit more comfortable on the eyes when you are gaming for longer sessions? That said, the Mini Plus is still not bad if you're putting it next to something like a standard smartphone these days. Fitting it into a larger coat jacket or into a backpack is also something that you can definitely do. It's just the base Mini is super cute in how absolutely tiny it is. But again, this Plus version just might be a bit more practical if you have larger fingers and hands, plus it has built-in Wi-Fi, which is a feature missing on the regular Mini, which enables remote gameplay functionality in supported games. So if you want to compete against friends, you can leverage that capability using the built-in Wi-Fi, as well as check for some occasional over-the-air updates. I'll also mention that if you're considering the Mini Plus, another rival of this console would be the Anbernic RG35XX, which is also styled after a retro Game Boy, and it has a same 3.5-inch screen. It just runs on a slightly different operating system, but overall these two consoles are a pretty close match to one another. Now you can find these Miyoo consoles available from a variety of sources, but the one that I picked up mine from was called Mech DIY, which seems to have a Black Friday Cyber Monday promotion going on at this point in time. It seems there is a 20% off coupon code, so it brings it closer to around $80 for the version that includes a 128GB micro SD card that comes with the OnionOS operating system pre-installed. As a refresher, this is a slightly more sophisticated OS that allows you to install different themes, but you can also find other configurations, including the console only with no card, and the cost there will be even lower. But if you want something a little bit more polished from a UI perspective, OnionOS is generally a good option to consider. You can also pick up the memory card with the OS separately down the line if you choose to go that route. And it comes in multiple colors. This is a transparent purple, which I do think looks really cool in this retro way. You can see all the components due to the see-through nature, but the plastic here still feels reasonably built from a construction point of view. It doesn't really flex or feel too hollow. It has a nice density to it, and also you have a removable back cover that houses the rechargeable 3000 milliamp hour capacity battery, so it's relatively easy to replace and repair down the line. And if the purple color isn't to your liking, you can also find it in more traditional black, also translucent, and there is going to be an opaque white color, as well as a gray colorway is also available. So this might be a good opportunity to consider something like this with some of the promotions going on as part of the holiday sale. And looks like they're further stacking that with some additional freebies thrown in. Some additional accessories, including stands, as well as bags, will be bundled in as well. So just for reference as FYI. Now otherwise, if we take a closer look at some of the top line specs, you can emulate over 50 retro consoles and systems, such as Game Boy, PlayStation 1, SNES, NES, WonderSwan, arcade games, and even some homebrew-style games. Ports are available as well, and giving you autosave and multitasking capability, so you're able to switch back and forth between different titles at a single button click, which is quite neat. Keep in mind though, like most of these retro handheld gaming consoles, again, Nintendo DS plus PS1 are pretty much the newest consoles that you can technically play. If you're looking at 3DS games or Nintendo Switch games, you'll have to look at more powerful systems, ones running on Windows or Android at the least, with faster CPU and GPU underneath the hood. This is what you can expect in a more entry-level model, supporting more of those legacy consoles for the sake of nostalgia or checking out titles that you never got to experience back in the day. Now again, it's using a Cortex A7 1.2 GHz processor. The screen res, by the way, is 640 by 480, and it's an IPS LCD screen. Up to 10 different save slots as part of that multitasking feature that we mentioned earlier for jumping back and forth. And here's the specific dimensions, as well as technically 128 megabytes of RAM, weighing 200 grams. It's relatively light, and battery lasts upwards of 5 hours if you have Wi-Fi turned off, but you can easily top it off using additional power banks when on the road. So here is the packaging. We have the aforementioned version with the OnionOS coupled with a 256GB micro SD card. It's a SanDisk Ultra card, so very fast read and write speeds. speeds. And by the way, the variant with a micro SD card, aside from the OnionOS, also comes with a couple hundred of ROMs or game titles to get you up and running, and then obviously you can bring over your own ROMs as well to check out additional titles. If you're picking up the version without any SD card though, just the system itself as is does not come with any built-in games. So you will need your own micro SD card or pick up the kit that includes one. And we also have the aforementioned screen protector as well as wipe, in addition to a USB Type-C charging and data sync cable connecting it to a computer for transferring files, and there's even a micro SD card to USB Type-A reader for, again, loading up additional files onto the card when connecting it to a computer. And the Miyoo Mini Plus does also have capabilities of music, MP4 playback, if you want to use it as a, again, DAP or MP3 player using the built-in apps and software inside that we'll see in a moment. In fact, there is a standard 3.5mm headphone jack. That being said, the console does not come with built-in Bluetooth, so wireless headphone connectivity is still something that you aren't able to do on the current generation. Just as a footnote, that would have been cool though if you could connect to even external controllers, but it is what it is. Type-C and micro SD card slot there at the bottom, and then on the left-hand edge, there's access to the volume rocker that feels pretty tactile and responsive. Top also features a status LED light as well as the power key, which is a little bit flush with the surface of the device and doesn't have quite as much of a tactile click, but maybe that's on purpose to make it less easy to accidentally hit. And then finally on the back, we have additional shoulder keys, L1, L2, and R1, R2. All of the shoulder keys as well as the front D-pad for a navigation toggle do feel very precise and a pretty high quality gamepad, which is of course important on a console like this. But thankfully all the buttons feel quite satisfying as you're pressing down, doesn't feel mushy at all, and that center button there for switching back and forth between open games. So again, by default this is the Linux-like operating system, which is fine. It's just a little bit simple when it comes to the UI, and again doesn't come with any built-in ROMs of its own. If you want to customize the look of the device with more themes, that's where that OnionOS experience will be beneficial. And so to access OnionOS, we simply have to pop in the micro SD card and it's all set up and done for us. Compared to if you're trying to install this yourself, it might be a little bit more of a complicated process. And even if you are popping in the card and removing it, it still remembers the previous theme that you saved it in. So this one, for example, is kind of a cyberpunk inspired theme, but it's also purple there. And again, this 3.5-inch screen I think offers pretty decent looking colors with generous enough viewing angles. Brightness is still going to be a little bit challenging if you are in direct sunlight, but in more shaded regions and particularly indoors, you're not going to have too many complaints here. Relatively slim and modern looking bezels as well on the top, left, and right sides. Again, by default, there are over 100 different themes that you can further play around with if you don't like the way it looks. And echoing our remarks from the Miyoo Mini V4, again, the themes are actually quite comprehensive. It's not only the wallpaper that changes, but even as you are in different menus here, you can see how the fonts as well as the style here changes as well. So they've done a pretty good job and just makes the system feel more curated, customized based on your favorite types of games. You're bound to find something that you enjoy and you're able to customize it further to match your vibes. And as the community around OnionOS continues to grow, there might be more themes available, created, and you're able to download those yourself, install them onto the SD card if you want to further customize it. But I think the 100 or so already look quite good. Here's another sampling of some other styles that you can expect to find. One's inspired by Star Wars, Spider-Man, Sonic here as well. Here's a slightly more clean version of OnionOS being displayed if you want something a bit more minimalistic. Here's one inspired by Rick and Morty, as well as other retro-styled games, and even inspired by Pokemon, Pac-Man theme. Here is the Simpsons theme. This is a PlayStation or really PSP theme, I would say, and also Game Boy theme. This one here's a bit more cute. Here's a NES theme, as well as a even Nintendo Switch theme can also be found. And here's one inspired by iOS as well, if you want something that's a bit more reminiscent of the icons on your phone. So it really is quite comprehensive and just makes the console feel a little bit more special as you are using it. Here's one from Kirby, another one inspired by Pokemon that might be one of my favorites as well. Other ones which are a bit more kind of simple and straightforward, like what we saw on the regular Miyoo Mini there, another kind of Pokemon icon theme, so on and so forth. This one from Game Boy, Dragon Ball themes here as well, including an icon pack here which is inspired by the Nintendo 3DS. Some final options here include one inspired by a retro, maybe computing system, including Windows 95, for instance. There's a tech dweeb version here as well. So you get the idea. There are plenty of options, which just gives it a complete overhaul in terms of the way the console feels. Here's one inspired by the Nintendo Wii. Another one here inspired by the aforementioned Windows 98. And now our console looks something like this, really cute in a quite geeky way. And what's kind of insane is something that fits in the palm of your hand likely already has more compute performance, as well as, again, having Wi-Fi built on in, as compared to real Windows 95, 98 computers from back in the day had much weaker processors and GPUs inside. So these are the things we sometimes take for granted. Taking a closer look at the OS here, the first tab takes us into all of the games sorted by various consoles for emulation. So there's going to be Atari, Amiga, some even more retro systems here, as well as Game Boy Advance, Genesis, taking us into Nintendo DS, Neo Geo, Pico, SNES, so on and so forth. So again, you get a pretty good collection. There's even Virtual Boy, Wander Swan, before it loops all the way around. And if we tap on one of the consoles here, let's say Game Boy Advance to start with, you'll also see a split layout with cover art information, if available, displayed here on the edge that you can sort through. So by default, this is going to be alphabetical, but we can also tap on the X button here to enter universal search. If you have hundreds and hundreds of games in the card, this might be a little bit easier. So for instance, we can tap on Pokemon, and it's found those titles from all the different systems and subfolders that they are located in. For instance, under Game Boy, you can find that these are the Pokemon titles compared to Game Boy Advance. Here are the corresponding versions available. Compared to Nintendo DS, we have additional versions, Black and White, Diamond, Pearl, Platinum available as well. Again, the controls are pretty intuitive. From selection, as well as the B button will take you back onto the previous page. And although there are slight moments of hesitation at times, also when you are searching through a longer collection, it takes a few extra seconds there, but overall, it's not frustrating to use, so the OnionOS feels quite polished and well optimized. A few other folders here include one for favorites, so if you have any titles that you particularly like, you can save them to access more quickly, as well as check out some of the recent games and applications that you've been using. Next tiles include Expert, which is really just another way of displaying some of the different games and consoles you're able to emulate, Atari, so on and so forth. And next one here is going to be apps. So this includes other Linux programs, such as a file manager that you can reference here, read the SD card. There's going to be the aforementioned video player. So MP4 file formats, for instance, can be played back. Let's jump on one instance here. This is a tutorial video that takes you through some instructions of how to use the controls, as well as fast forward, play, pause, and even change the aspect ratio of the video clip as well. You can even change into the audio waveform instead of the video footage if preferred. In fact, there's even a simple PDF document reader on here as well, so it kind of is like a PDA in a way. And there's also going to be Moonlight. This is for game streaming, allowing you to connect wirelessly into another system for playing back those titles. Again, the availability of built-in Wi-Fi allows you to leverage this feature, which you couldn't really do on the regular Mini V4 since it doesn't have any wireless chip. A couple of final extras built on in by default, including activity tracker to see how long you've been gaming, as well as a random game launcher. There's even a built-in screen recorder as well if you wanted to save and then view back those recordings later on. Plus some more advanced settings, including retro arch, can also be referenced here as well. So if you really want to dig a little bit deeper, you are able to play around with some of those settings for more advanced players. And then finally, under regular device settings, this is where you're able to change the screen brightness, as well as connect to a Wi-Fi network. Generally speaking, the reception strengths seem to be fine as far as the built-in antenna is concerned. Advanced display properties also allow you to change the hue, luminance, saturation, and contrast if you want it to be warmer as well as cooler. Last but not least, some of the sound effects as you're navigating around the system, as well as a timer after a couple of minutes of inactivity can also be set up. Again, more or less identical compared to the Mini V4 that we reviewed, since they are running on the same OS with the same processor inside. Let's do a quick example of gameplay using some titles, starting off with Game Boy Advance, and I can confirm that it is playing back at pretty much 100% speed, no real drop frames for playing back some of these classic titles, which isn't too surprising because the actual processor inside of these systems of yesteryear that it's trying to imitate were all slower than 1.2 gigahertz, so it's able to play them back without too many issues. When it comes to extended gameplay that would be longer than 45 minutes to an hour, in this area tends to get a little bit warmer but never was too uncomfortable to hold, After all, you have a larger surface area as compared to the regular Mini, so it dissipates heat maybe a little bit better as well. So generally didn't encounter things like thermal throttling, and performance was still quite consistent even for longer gameplay sessions. And all of the controls are properly mapped in titles and games that I tried out as well, so it felt like you were playing on the actual native system. And that includes a start button here for saving, accessing additional utility functions when you are playing back Pokemon here, for instance. Now we can also tap on the, again, multitasking key. There is a haptic vibration motor in here as well, by the way, that buzzes, similar to on some higher end game controllers. So if you are playing back some shooters, particularly some of the ports, you are able to take advantage of that and get a little bit more immersive gameplay. So this is, again, the multitasking switcher view. We're able to save this game as well as then hop back into other open games. And now taking a quick look at a PlayStation 1 title, this is Crash Bandicoot, another classic. Again, all of the animations and frame rates also continue to be pretty consistent. So we're starting off here in the classic beach theme and with full 100% speed, not really noticing too many dropped frames. Colors and contrast also seem more than satisfactory enough when it comes to gameplay. That being said, certain consoles like, again, PlayStation 1 maybe are originally intended for a TV or larger screen as you're playing along. I guess on a 3.5-inch screen at least it is already more comfortable versus the 2.8-inch panel compared to the actual Miyoo Mini V4, but just depending on the system that you're playing and the specific title, I would say, you can still feel like you are looking at a slightly smaller screen at times for certain icons, but definitely still playable. And for SNES, I see some classics like Bomberman, as well as Super Mario Kart. Let's actually try that out. So once again, continuing to load here without too many problems, as you can tell. Now maybe only one slight con from a UI perspective is it's a little bit harder to actually sort by specific genres of titles. For instance, action and adventure versus strategy versus puzzle versus first-person shooter versus puzzle-type games. You don't really get that classification as part of the metadata of the titles on the system. It's just alphabetically sorted, or you have to go through and search for a specific name. So for content discovery purposes, since there are so many games, if you're getting a version with a memory card bundled, I would actually recommend if in the future they can add some of that metadata for genre info, that could be nice to see. But as a whole, again, the games themselves are definitely still playable at pretty much 100% frame rate here, which isn't too surprising considering that PlayStation 1 and Nintendo DS are pretty much the highest complexity when it comes to GPU games that it's able to handle. And since those DS as well as PlayStation games can also run pretty well from a frame rate and performance point of view, it's not that unsurprising that other consoles and systems which are even older and use fewer resources will perform as well, if not even better, on hardware like this. So not too problematic when it comes to playing back, again, these titles. Speaking of Nintendo DS, here's also a few examples. We have Asphalt, as well as Assassin's Creed, FIFA, Final Fantasy, as some examples that I'm also seeing on the current list here. And jumping into Asphalt here just as one example, you can tell that overall loading speeds and performance, again, is still pretty much at 100%. The only slight downside is because the DS is a two-screen console, we have a much smaller secondary screen which is being separated there at the very bottom corner of the screen. So it's also not a touch panel. You can't really use your finger and interact with it that way. So depending on the DS title that you're playing, if it requires touch input, then obviously it's not going to be quite as enjoyable of an experience. But again, some of these racing games, from a performance point of view, still are holding back quite well, and it is a more comfortable experience compared to the regular Miyoo Mini at the very least, which was even more cramped. Here are some Microsoft DOS games as well. So these are games perhaps originally intended for a computer. Screen here is actually looking quite good from a visual point of view. That being said, for certain computer games where you may need a computer for input, as you can tell, there's a virtual cursor that pops up with an on-screen keyboard. As for ports, we can also find some titles like Doom, as well as Quake, and interestingly, on these games, you do get the genre sorting that I was mentioning earlier, including platformers, options including some puzzle games, 2048, Minesweeper that you're able to play back here as well. But a file structure like this, I do think makes it a little easier to find and discover some games that you may not be aware of in the past. Anyways, let's tap on Doom just as an instance, and you have many different versions of Doom. But yet again, it seems like the performance is holding up quite well, surprisingly, on the system here, with the screen looking nice and sharp, in addition to the haptic vibration motor, again, working on some of these homebrew style games, where again, as you are getting shot at or you're actually shooting, you can hear that vibration, giving you some tactile sensation. And as we tap on the multitasking switcher here, we can find again all of the 10 recent games that we were playing and instantly jump back onto that point just by clicking on those corresponding titles, allowing you to easily continue where you last left off. Here's one final side-by-side comparison. So in terms of the layout on the front, they are also quite similar, and the shoulder keys are a little bit higher up on the regular Mini because it is a smaller console overall. So as you're holding it, it looks something like this compared to, again, the Mini Plus. The speaker also felt loud enough coming out here from the front, and even after an hour or so of gameplay, didn't feel like I was getting too sore as I was holding onto the console. Much more ergonomic compared to using a smartphone and just touching on the screen and gripping it. You get the tactility of physical buttons, and the grip here is a little bit better as well. So that is more or less it as far as our hands-on review of the Miyoo Mini Plus. Overall, I think it is a very fun, retro handheld console for playing back some of these classic titles. So you can check out more details if you are interested in something like this in the links down below. Really not bad. But for now, that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That has been the Miyoo Mini Plus.